Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. Thanks for joining me back on my channel here. As you may have noticed, I've had a bit of a switch around. So I'm filming from a slightly different angle. You're finally seeing the guitar wall, which I think looks kind of cooler in the background. I'd be really interested to hear what you guys think about it, whether this new look works or whether it doesn't. I'm trying some different things out lighting wise as well. So yeah, let me know in the comments. Anyway, on with the lesson. So a couple of weeks ago, we did a real deep chord study of Need Your Love So Bad, based on the Peter Green era Fleetwood Mac version of the tune in the key of A. So if you've not seen that, do check that out, because that's going to be real essential viewing before this lead study companion piece to it. And as far as this lead study goes, I've given it a lot of thought, trying to think about the best way to go about doing it. And in my opinion, the best way is to look at Peter Green's solo first of all. We won't get into minute detail. You can get the lesson materials for that if you want to see the exact tab for this. But we're just going to highlight some talking points, and then we're going to make our own solo using some of those same approaches and maybe adding a few little extras in there. So essentially you'll be learning Peter Green's intro and outro from the original recording, and then you'll learn a lead study that I've put together using a lot of the same concepts with a few extras. And again, the lesson materials for this will include all of that stuff neatly typed up in tab and notation, Guitar Pro and PDF formats, and you'll also get the audio files for this. That includes my backing track and the reference recordings for my playthroughs. I also think it'd be a really good idea for you to have the chord charts out from our rhythm study so you can cross-reference where we're at in the progression so we can make more sense about the note choices that we're going for. So Peter Green's intro on this is a real masterclass in how to get a lot of mileage out of just a handful of notes. And if you're a regular viewer of my channel, you know that that's what we're all about here: efficiency. And the scale that we're using to find this small group of notes is the A major pentatonic scale. And if we're thinking of the cage system as our way of navigating the various shapes of it, we're within the C shape. And visualize how your A major pentatonic would look organized within that zone. And we're going to use this small little pocket of notes. Mostly these three notes: the 11th fret of the G string, the 10th fret of the B, the 12th fret of the B, and then later on we'll also add the 12th fret on the top E string, as well as a couple of notes that aren't within that scale but are from its minor pentatonic equivalent. So let's have a look at the various ways that he makes those notes work for him and how he makes them really sing. Here's the opening phrase of the solo. Bending that 12th fret of the B string upper major third, and then we play this. Notice how this little triangular shape here falls so comfortably under the fingers when you get that second finger playing the G strings note. This little triangular thing is often called the blues triangle, as we've spoken about in many of my other videos. And there's so many ways that you can embellish, like he does there: hammer on from 10 to 12, or you could do trills, or a pull off of course, or a slide, or a bend. Got so many options for expression. And those phrases are both happening over an A chord. It goes from an A major to an A7. Now we hit the D chord in bar number 3, and we play this. Same group of notes again, but the context of those notes has changed now to really frame the D major chord. If you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. Here's the major third of the D chord, and then here's your 5th and your 6th. So we could be even visualizing this D major bar chord here, and see how the notes make sense to the chord underneath. And then we get into a note that isn't in the major pentatonic, the 13th fret of the B string, which we bend up a whole tone. Now I talk in depth about that in my Stormy Monday lead study video, which I do recommend checking out if you've not seen it. Essentially what we're doing here is we're going from the A major pentatonic to the A minor pentatonic, and we're grabbing that minor third and bending it up to the 4th. If you think about your A minor pentatonic within this area here at the 12th fret, our A shape, if we're thinking cage system, 13 and 15 on that B string, that's where we're getting those notes from. And it provides a real nice contrast, and it makes a lot of sense harmonically. At this point in the progression, we're playing over a D sharp diminished 7th, which would contain a C note in the chord. And of course this note here at the 13th fret of the B string is C. And we bend it up a whole tone, and then we come back to the major pentatonic and do a half bend at the 12th fret before returning to the A root. Very easy way to get a bit of colour there. Then we're back to the major pentatonic triangular shape, where we do a bit of expression again. Lots of vibrato on resting notes, little late hammer on, that kind of thing. Now he does something very restrained over the A to the F sharp minor. He just does a 12th fret bend on the B string for the A chord. That's up to the major third. Then for the F sharp minor, 12th fret bend on the top E string, taking you to the 5th of the chord. So he's thinking of the chords there and hitting target notes from within them. Now the B minor chord comes along, and what does he play? He plays this B note, the root of the chord, with a little half step pre-bend. And a nice little pull off again to the 10th fret, some vibrato, and then one of those late staccato hammer-ons back to the 12th fret. Then back to that little galloping phrase from earlier, which we extend a little further. It's important that you get the timing on those things just right, really make them condense into a nice little small cluster of rhythms. And then some double stops to finish. So these two notes here are played over a D major chord, because the turnaround here is one of those typical blues turnarounds that goes from the 1 to the 4, back to the 1, then the 5. So we're thinking D major, and he plays the major third and the 5th, and then onto the 5th and the flat 7, kind of implying D7, and then walk up chromatically until you reach the A chord resolution point, and look at what we've ended up with there, the top two notes of this A major triad. You've got the major third and the 5th. Very simple. All it takes is a little bit of awareness about where you're at in the changes. So that's his intro solo done. Now let's move to his outro solo, which involves a lot of the same techniques again, but he just takes things up a level, a bit more fierce in places, and a little more involved. The first phrase, so a couple of different bending distances, bending that to the minor third, so taking from the major pentatonic and moving it into the minor pentatonic, and then back to the major pentatonic with that pure bend up to the major third of A. And then he plays, which is a stunning little phrase over the A7 chord, focusing heavily on the root there. And then when we go to the D chord, he plays a very similar phrase to what we had in the intro, focusing on this little cluster of notes here, the 3rd, the 5th, and the flat 7 of that D chord. A couple of different distance bends there as well. 13 bending up a whole tone, so that's the flat 7 going up to the root of the D chord. And then the 12th fret bending not even quite a half, I'd call that a quarter, and that's how I've written it on the sheet, just a little lazy quarter bend. Back to the root of the D chord, and then the major third. And then the D sharp diminished 7th comes along, and he plays his most fierce phrase yet. And he's kicking that off with this epic 1.5 step bend at the 12th fret of the top E. Really make sure that you're taking it up to that pitch of the 15th fret, and you can give it a bit of extra sauce if you like. Just really rake yourself through those muted strings to give it that extra bit of bark on the front end. And a phrase like that really is all about your control over how far you're bending the strings. You know, we go from a 1.5 step bend at that 12th fret, and then we walk down, lazy quarter bend at the 13th fret, some fast vibrato, and then half bend at 12, full bend at 12. You've got to have a real good command over those distances and make it sound smooth and effortless. Then we're back to the A chord with that same bend again from before, bending up to the major third, and then the F sharp minor, same bend as before, 12th fret bend on the top E string. Same response again over the B minor, and then over the E7. Nice little rake here, where I would do this with just a single downstroke, like a mini sweep between the 11th fret of the G string and the 10th fret of the B string. And then an upstroke on that 12th fret of the B string with a kind of 3/4 bend, and then another different distance there, full bend on the 12th fret this time. Again, some real good vibrato on that root note. And then just as it's fading out pretty strongly here on the recording, he plays what in my opinion is probably the coolest lick in the whole thing, but it's very hard to hear it, so you've really got to turn your volume up on your hi-fi to pick this bit out. Over the D chord he plays So we're really just thinking of notes from the D chord to begin with, or from a D major triad, sliding into the root and the major third, and then walking down some of the key notes that you'd have over a D7 chord, a flat 7, a 6th, and then the 5th. You could call that D mixolydian if you like. But I'm just thinking of target notes that sound good over a D chord or a D dominant chord, because we're playing the blues after all, so getting that dominant 7th in is always going to be good. So we play, then over the A chord, major pentatonic, the 6th to the root, always a nice little pickup, which again you'll have seen me banging on about over and over again in my lead studies. And then to the major third and the 5th of the A chord, you can just be visualizing this A major bar chord or simply the A major triad here. Back to those two notes from the D major, and back to your A major again. Very tasteful stuff. Okay, so before we get onto our lead study that employs some of these ideas and a few more, let's just have a bit of a break, a bit of an intermission, and do a bit of gear talk. This is my 1964 Gibson ES330, all original, aside from the fretwork, the nut and the tuners, which I had recently done, and it plays beautifully now since that work was carried out. I'm running this through an Analog Man King of Tone using the yellow side of the pedal just to lightly boost the front end of my 64 Princeton reverb, matching ear to this guitar, which is kind of a cool little thing. And I've got the Princeton set with the treble quite high. I've got it all the way up at 7, and I've got the bass at like 3.5, and the reverb's at about 4 on there. The volume's at 6.5-ish. Obviously every amp will differ massively, but those are my current settings. I should also mention that I'm on the middle position here, and the bridge pickup, everything's wide open, volume and tone all the way up. Tone's all the way up on the neck pickup, but the volume's back a little bit, back to about 8. But again, obviously that's going to vary wildly from guitar to guitar. But I just sort of roll it back until I hear that low end drop out a little bit. It gives it this really nice, well-rounded kind of sound. I believe it's something that Larry Carlton often talks about doing with his 335. So, on to our very own lead study. Like I say, it uses a lot of the same ideas that Peter Green was using, but we just push things forward a bit further. So we have the A major pentatonic to start with. And then a bit of minor pentatonic, courtesy of that half bend rather than the full bend. So full bend, and then a half. And then using that 12th fret of the top E string and then moving into the next position of our A major pentatonic. And again with that little half bend at the 12th fret of the B string to imply the minor third, just brings in that little bit of dirt from the minor pentatonic. Makes a huge difference. This little phrase without the bend is something that I've spoken about at length before, which to me is kind of a bluegrass little sign-off sound, where you've got the minor third to the 2nd degree and then the root. It's a great little sound. In this case we're doing that, but we're pre-bending that 12th fret to do it. Same approach though. And then we're thinking of the D major chord. We walk up chromatically to the major third, and then grab the root, back to the third, then the flat 7. So very much like Peter Green, we're focusing on notes from a D7 arpeggio here. And then very much thinking A minor blues scale at this point. So think of your A minor pentatonic, add that flattened 5th, and use it as a place to pull off from. Very cool group of notes that you'll have heard people like Clapton and Stevie Ray Vaughan using a lot. Our exact phrase is this. And then over the D sharp diminished, very similar to what Peter Green does, that little half bend at the 12th fret of the B string, before we actually go one step further to outline this diminished and play a full diminished 7th arpeggio. Now D sharp diminished, as you'll probably know with the diminished, and if you don't know this, check out my diminished video, you can move it around in minor third distances and the same 4 notes remain the same, but they invert and change position. It's kind of interesting. It's what you'd call a symmetrical chord. So your D sharp diminished, you can visualize it 3 frets higher, F sharp diminished, but it's still D sharp diminished as well, because each of these 4 notes can now be considered to be the root. Here's the D sharp if you're wondering where that's moved to. Now, one of the beautifully simple things about the diminished is that because of its symmetry, every note is the same distance apart. Everything in the chord is a minor third apart, which on the guitar just equates to the distance of 3 frets. So if you're ever desperate and not quite sure what to play, as long as you find a starting note from your diminished, you can just move around that string in minor thirds, and it's going to sound great. It's better than standing there in silence and wondering what the hell to do. So with that in mind, check this out. We tie those 2 points together chromatically, courtesy of a couple of pull-offs, and then a slide, and then we continue on down our diminished 7th arpeggio, but we just swap the order of those last 2 notes. Because we're thinking D7 or D sharp diminished, so that's a good target note to have. And then we pick up that other note and slide up a whole tone and back. Again, I think it's really important just to point out that if you get the lesson materials for this, you'll have every single lick written out in tab and notation, from Peter Green's parts and my own part, which is why I'm not going into extreme detail here on fingerings and things, because the video would be so long. And most people appreciate this way of doing things. You know, that's 99% of my viewers say this is ideal, because we talk about the main talking points, go into some depth on shapes that are being used and concepts, but we don't spend too much time talking about specific fingerings and stuff, because the sheets take care of all of that. So I guess that's just a long way around as saying, if you feel like you need more guidance, that's what the sheet music is for. Or if you really do feel like you still need some extreme detail phrase to phrase, then book a private lesson. Now, continuing on with the solo, we're going to head back to our A major chord and play a phrase that you'll have heard me use a lot. This kind of grouping of notes using double stops on different strings and things. I love that sound. And it's all A major pentatonic, major third, hammering from the root to the second, and then grabbing these 2 notes together, the 12th fret of the D and the 12th fret of the B string, to slide in to 2 more notes from your major pentatonic. Or you can just simply be thinking of an A major chord shape there. Either way, you've got the 5th and the 3rd of A, and then the 5th on top, and then the 6th, and then the root, which happens to coincide with the change to F sharp minor. So that's also a good note for that chord, right? Because that's your minor third. That kind of stuff, by the way, sounds massive, but it's very simple, isn't it, when you can visualize a chord shape? Pretty stuff. Then over the F sharp minor, this painfully beautiful thing of grabbing the minor third and the 9th, or the 2nd degree, so you get that brief little clash before you bend up to the minor third and complete the octave. Kind of Bill Frisell-esque. And then to the B minor chord, where we're focusing mostly on notes from a B minor chord, pre-bending to the minor third before coming back to the root, then bringing in the flat 7 and going back up. Now over the 5 chord, the E7, we go to the A minor blues scale to bring a bit more dirt in and more character, before returning back to the major pentatonic to grab the major third and the root of the resolving A chord. Again, if you want a real in-depth look at how to blend major and minor pentatonics for that change of flavour, check out my Stormy Monday lead study. Now we're about to re-embark on that common blues turnaround. 1, 4, 1, 5. Now we've already landed on the 1, courtesy of its root here, before we go back to just an A major triad, root, 3rd, 5th, and then D major comes along, so we land on a D root, and again think of a D major triad, major 3rd, 5th, add the 6th for a bit of bluesy flavour, and then back to the 10th fret there to coincide with the return to the A chord, so that's the root, and then the E7 comes along, lazy little half bend at the 11th fret of the G string, let it come down before returning to the 9th fret of the G string to land the root of this 5 chord. Makes a lot of sense. Now for the second go round, I'm not soloing at all really, I'm just trying to play the vocal melody, using things like sixths, which again, like I say, are very pretty. Getting fruity with some of that A7 stuff, the root and the flat 7, letting them clash. And keep returning back, and then go to your blues scale. Again, just try and think about the vocal melody and hit all the same notes that he's singing. That's a nice little phrase. A major triad, bit of sus4, some really expressive bending. Don't be afraid to do those little quick bends. Very cool. And then the sign-off phrase, 12 to 14 and back, and then major third and root of the A chord, landing back kind of where it all started, the A shape. No, sorry, the A chord with the C shape. So a really nice little study on Peter Green's method for playing over this beautiful piece. Take note of how sparse his phrasing is and how much he really lets everything breathe. I think that's such an important thing to take away from this. You don't need a lot of notes when you can really be expressive with the notes that you use. And make sure that you do go back and learn the changes if you haven't already, because no one likes someone who only solos. You know, you've got to get down there and shovel coal with the rest of us sometimes. And do let me know down in the comments how you're getting along with these things, and if you have any requests for future videos. I'm going to do more of this sort of major minor pentatonic blend stuff, maybe through the lens of a bit of Billy Gibbons next time. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Do make sure to like and subscribe, and check out my Patreon for the lesson materials. And I'll see you all next time. All right, take care.